Around 7,000 years ago, someone in terrible pain does something insane. Sick, desperate, maybe dying, they grab a random plant off the ground and eat it, just hoping. Sometimes that plant kills them, but sometimes they get better. That terrifying gamble, repeated millions of times across thousands of years, is where all of medicine comes from. Every pill you have ever swallowed traces back to it. So how did we ever figure it out? Think about the sheer scale of the problem our ancestors faced. They lived in a world absolutely full of ways to die. Infections, wounds, fevers, broken bones, rotten teeth, childbirth, parasites, plagues, and they had none of the things we take for granted. No hospitals, no pharmacies, no doctors in the way we understand them, no knowledge of germs or cells or how the body actually works on the inside. When you got sick, you had almost nothing standing between you and death except your own body and whatever your people had managed to learn. And here is the crucial thing. They did learn, slowly, painfully, over countless generations. Humans built up a body of medical knowledge without any of the science we now rely on. The question is, how? The answer is a mix of three things: observation, desperation, and a whole lot of trial and error. Let's start with observation because early humans were incredibly sharp observers of the natural world. Their survival depended on knowing which plants were safe to eat, which were poisonous, which filled you up, and which did something strange to your body. Over time, they noticed patterns. They noticed that if you chewed a certain leaf, your pain faded a little. That a certain root made you throw up, which sometimes helped if you'd eaten something bad. That a certain bark brought down a fever. That pressing a certain moss onto a wound seemed to stop it from going rotten. Each of these was a tiny discovery, usually stumbled upon by accident or by sheer desperation. And once someone found something that worked, they remembered it. They told others. And that knowledge got passed down from parent to child, from healer to apprentice, growing a little richer with each generation. Now, it is really tempting to look back at ancient medicine, dismiss it all as primitive nonsense, superstition, magic, useless herbs, and empty rituals. But that would be a huge mistake. Because here's the surprising truth. A shocking amount of ancient medicine actually worked. These people, through thousands of years of trial and error, stumbled onto remedies so effective that we still use versions of them today. Let me give you the single best example. For a very long time, across many different cultures all over the world, people used the bark and leaves of the willow tree to treat pain and fever. Ancient healers had no idea why it worked. They just knew that it did. Fast forward to the modern era, and scientists studied willow bark and isolated the active compound inside it. They refined it, tweaked it, and turned it into one of the most famous, most used drugs on the entire planet. Aspirin, that's right. One of the most common medicines in your local pharmacy is essentially a refined, perfected version of a remedy that ancient people were using thousands of years ago. They found it not through chemistry, but through desperate patient trial and error. And willow bark is just one example. Ancient people used honey on wounds, and we now know honey genuinely has antibacterial properties. They used certain molds long before anyone understood antibiotics. All over the world, traditional plant remedies have turned out, on scientific investigation, to contain real, active, useful compounds. Ancient medicine was not just wishful thinking. It was the world's longest running and most dangerous science experiment. They even learned by watching animals. Our ancestors paid close attention to the creatures around them. They noticed which plants a sick animal would seek out and eat, plants it would normally ignore. They watched animals lick their wounds, or roll in certain mud, or eat clay, and they copied them. If an animal in distress instinctively went for a particular plant, maybe that plant was worth a try. This kind of observation, learning medicine by watching the rest of the living world, was another powerful source of knowledge. Nature was their textbook, and they read it very, very carefully. But now for the darker side of the story. Because for every remedy that worked, there were countless experiments that went horribly wrong. Remember, this was trial and error in the world of medicine often meant death. For every helpful plant they discovered, they must have poisoned themselves many times over, learning through fatal mistakes which things not to eat. And even the cures that stuck around were sometimes worse than the disease. Throughout history, humans came up with medical treatments that were, by our standards, horrifying. People were bled on purpose, cut open to drain bad blood, based on the mistaken idea that illness came from an imbalance in the body's fluids. This practice of bloodletting, which persisted for thousands of years, often weakened already sick patients and almost certainly killed a great many of them. Healers used ingredients we now know are toxic, like mercury, which was used as a medicine for centuries, despite slowly poisoning the people who took it. The history of medicine is not a clean, triumphant march of progress. It's a messy, bloody, trial and error story, full of dead ends, tragic mistakes, and treatments that did far more harm than good. For every willow bark, there was a jar of something that quietly killed the patient. And tangled up in all of this, both the successes and the failures, was magic. To ancient people, the line between medicine and the supernatural barely existed. If you got sick, it wasn't because of invisible germs, a concept they had no way of knowing about. It was because a spirit was angry, or a god was punishing you, or someone had cursed you, or an evil force had entered your body. So, the person who treated the sick, the healer, the shaman, the medicine man or woman, was often as much a spiritual figure as a practical one. Their treatments came bundled with chants, rituals, prayers, and ceremonies. And here's the fascinating part. That spiritual side may not have been as useless as it sounds. We now understand the placebo effect, the very real, measurable way that simply believing you are being healed can actually make you feel better and sometimes genuinely improve your condition. When a trusted, powerful healer performed an elaborate, confident ritual over a frightened sick person, that ceremony itself, the belief and the comfort it created, could have a real effect. The ritual and the remedy worked hand in hand. Belief was part of the medicine. Now let's look at some of the astonishing hard evidence ancient people left behind because some of it will genuinely surprise you. Consider a procedure called trepanation. This is the practice of drilling or scraping a hole straight through a living person's skull. It is one of the oldest known surgical procedures, and we have found skulls with these holes from all over the ancient world, thousands and thousands of years old. Now here is the truly shocking part. Many of these skulls show clear signs of healing around the hole, which means the person did not die on the table. They survived the operation. They survived having a hole cut into their skull with stone tools and no anesthetic as we know it. And they lived long enough afterward for the bone to start growing back. That is an almost unbelievable level of surgical daring and skill for the ancient world. And it wasn't the only thing they could do. Ancient healers across different cultures could set broken bones so they healed properly. They could stitch up wounds. They knew how to use splints and bandages. They developed detailed catalogs of medicinal plants and how to prepare them. We've even found the preserved body of a man from over 5,000 years ago who is carrying a kind of personal medical kit, including specific natural materials that we now know can fight parasites. Exactly the kind of parasites his preserved gut turned out to contain. He wasn't carrying those materials by accident. He knew, in some way, what they were for. So when you step back and look at the whole picture, a remarkable story comes into focus. Ancient humans, with no understanding of germs, no microscopes, no chemistry, and no modern science of any kind, still managed to build up a genuinely useful body of medical knowledge. They did it the hard way, the only way available to them. They observed the natural world with incredible care. They experimented on themselves, often at the cost of their lives. They passed down every hard-won lesson so that no discovery had to be made twice. And brick by brick, remedy by remedy, mistake by mistake, they assembled the foundation that everything else would later be built on. When science finally arrived, it didn't start from nothing. It started from thousands of years of accumulated human experience about what helped and what harmed. Modern medicine didn't replace that ancient knowledge so much as test it, refine it, explain it, and build upon it. So, how did ancient humans discover medicine? They discovered it through a staggering act of collective courage that lasted tens of thousands of years. They discovered it by paying attention, by being desperate enough to try, by being brave enough to drill into a skull to save a life, and by being willing again and again to gamble their own bodies in the eternal fight against sickness and pain. Every one of those anonymous ancient people, the ones who chewed the bark, who tested the plants, who survived the surgery, and even the ones who died learning what not to do, are part of an unbroken chain that leads directly to you. So the next time you swallow a painkiller for a headache, or get stitches, or take an antibiotic that saves your life, take just 1 second to remember where it all began. It began with a sick, frightened human thousands of years ago looking down at a plant, not knowing if it was food, medicine, or poison, and being brave enough or desperate enough to find out. Everything we know about healing started with that single, terrifying, hopeful bite. If you made it this far, you're my kind of person. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you around the next Ancient Fire. Take care.